It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We have a returning guest today, B.R. Bates. Billy Bates, B.R. Bates. And you can find her at brbates.com, and her Instagram is B.R. Bates as well. She's got a blog spot, blogspot.com, called From the Keyboard of B.R. Bates. And also, too, you can meet her in person at the Reynolds Library in Howard City, Michigan, September 24th at 6 p.m. Now, we had her on before. She was talking about this book, what is this? Pull this up right here. The Baby Doll Serial Killer. We had her on about that. You can check that out in the archives on Spreaker. But today she's back, and it's the CRACK City Strangler. The Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins, Murders in the Motor Series, Book 2. Miss Billy Bates, are you there, ma'am? I almost called you sir.
I am here. Hello. Great to be back on. Thank you.
Yeah, remind the audience, though, who is B.R. Bates?
I am a longtime writer. I have a degree in journalism. I spent many years in the newspaper business, the daily newspaper business, including in Detroit for 5 years. I worked in Wisconsin. I worked in Saginaw, Michigan, in newspapers. And then I went into the corporate world for a few years after that. But I've always been a writer all my life, loved writing, and have more recently turned to true crime. So the Baby Doll Serial Killer book was my first book in true crime, and this CRACK City Strangler is my second book, and I'm really enjoying the research.
Well, yeah, that first one about the baby doll story, man, that was pretty fascinating. Well, you were telling me off the air that you moved out to the wilderness. What's the story with that?
I am living in the country. A couple years ago, moved out, but still probably considered greater metro Detroit. I'm about an hour from the city now. I'll never move too far from Detroit ever again, even though I did live in Washington, D.C. for a few years, in Atlanta, Georgia for a few years. But this is where I am right now, close enough to Detroit for a good day trip now and then.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I love D.C., man. My daughter was there for 4 years for college, so I was up there. Oh, man, D.C.'s a beautiful city, man. Okay, so let's see here. The CRACK City Strangler, the Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins. Who's Benjamin Atkins?
Benjamin Atkins was convicted of several crimes, killing 11 women in Detroit in 1991 and 1992. He was known to have attacked at least 13. He has a couple survivors that we know about, possibly more, but he was convicted in 1994, incarcerated, and then he died a few years later while he was in prison. But at the time that he was operating, he hunted women on Woodward Avenue in Detroit, and when he was arrested in August 1992, he did have a little claim to fame then. Police figured he probably held the notoriety of killing the most people in a short period of time. He killed the 11 women, as I said, but he did it in a span of as little as 6 months, possibly 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, I thought I heard you wrong when you said that. Between 91 and 92, and you said 11 murders. I says, how could that be? So 6 months, you say, too.
Yep, as little as 6 months, because the first known victim, her name was Patricia Cannon George, and she was known to be alive around Thanksgiving time, late November 1991, so was killed sometime after that, and then the last victim was the end of May 1992.
And so what do you think? Any possibility that there were more cases that we don't know about?
Probably.
Really?
Probably because I've spoken to a survivor who's never been known about until now. She had commented online, and I contacted her and talked with her further, and she did have an interesting story to tell as being a young teenager, only 15 years old, and encountering Atkins a year before he actually committed any of the crimes that he's known for, and just in a very casual situation went off somewhere with him to smoke, to do drugs, to do crack, and it went sideways like it tended to do with Atkins, and he started to attack her. And this was such a normal seeming event to her that I really have to figure this may have happened more often with other females who just never reported these encounters.
You know, I was going to ask you, what set this guy off to go on this insane killing spree? And it's right there in the title, the Crack City Strangler. The guy's got crack. Yep. Okay, but what set him off? The crack, I guess, right? The obvious?
Margie is the survivor I mentioned who was only 15, and she said when he started smoking, he became someone else. She described it as demonic, and she said the only thing that got him to stop, he was grabbing for her throat. He was telling her, "I'm going to kill you." Wow. But she started talking real fast. She told him she had a family, don't take me away from my family. She just started really talking fast, but it was giving him money. She got some money out of her pocket or out of her purse, and once she gave that to him, it's tended to soothe him, and then she was able to break away from him and survive. So, crack seemed to, he was a crack addict himself, and the victims that he preyed upon were crack addicts, but crack seemed to be a key component of these crimes.
And crack was around way before the 90s. So when was this young girl, the 15-year-old, when was that incident? Before the 90s?
That was 1990. She pegs it at December 1990, which would have been about 10 months before the first known attack at the time, which was another survivor. Her name was Darlene. We figure October 1991 when Darlene was attacked. So Margie says it was December 1990. And
how old is this guy if he's hanging out with a 15-year-old girl giving her crack?
Yeah, he was even young when he was arrested in 1992. He was born in 1968. He was 23 years old when he was committing most of these crimes.
Wow. And then what was his cause of death then in prison, a young guy like that?
He had HIV. He died of AIDS, I believe, not with AIDS, but I believe it was said at the time in 1997 he died of AIDS complications.
Do we know how he contracted the HIV?
That is a very good question. I explore that a little bit in the book because I have my own feeling on that. You remember back then when AIDS first came into the news, I remember it as 1980s. I used to watch that TV show Dynasty. Yeah. I loved the Dynasty show. And Rock Hudson did a guest spot on that show for a season. And he was a very highly publicized person who had HIV at the time. And there was concern that he was going to be kissing Linda Evans, his co-star, in one of the scenes on Dynasty. And it was this big stink about it. But 1980s, people really were talking about HIV and AIDS. And back then, if you recall, it seemed to be like a 10-year thing. If you were diagnosed as having HIV, they figured you might have like about 10 years with the virus before you died. That was before the advancements we've had since then, and people are living much longer. They're living full lives, thankfully, with the medical advances that we've made since then. But back then, it was a death sentence, and that's how it was seen. So if you're thinking in those terms, 1997 he died, I would think he contracted it in the 1980s in his life on the street. He was a homeless person living on the street most of the time. He would occasionally stay with his brother, sleep on his brother's couch, but most of the time he was sleeping in empty buildings. He was working prostitution himself. He was doing drugs with people, so possibly sharing needles. So there's a variety of ways that he could have contracted it on the street.
Oh, yeah, that's all the high-risk behaviors, every single one of them, perhaps, Oh, boy. So what brought this guy to be a young man, 23 years old, out on the streets, prostituting himself? How did he wind up there?
He had a very troubled childhood. He had a very unstable childhood. He he and his brother, he had an older brother who was just 1 year older, and they were together all through their childhood and actually most of their adulthood, too, before Benjamin died or was incarcerated and then died. But their mom, her name was Judy, and she was very forthright at the time of this case in talking about her younger years and becoming addicted to heroin. She was working as a prostitute. She was doing sex work out on the streets, and sometimes she would take the two boys with her. And Ben told police when he was arrested that he had memories of being a little kid in the back seat of a car with his brother while his mom was in the front seat with a client, with a John. And so they had very unstable childhood in that way. Judy left them at one point with an acquaintance of hers, and then that was discovered by authorities. People realized, okay, these two kids have been left with someone else by their mom. And so the boys became wards of the county, and they went into the foster system. And from there, they went to a series of foster homes for a few years, and then they went into a home for boys in the inner city of Detroit, and that was a very negative experience for Benjamin. He claimed that he was sexually abused there, and they spent 2 years there, and then they were discharged back into the care of their mom, who had been working that whole time on trying to get some kind of stable environment for them. She had a boyfriend who was making decent money. She had a place to live. They felt, okay, she's done a good job at trying to work up to the level where she can take care of these boys again. So the two boys were discharged back into her care when they were about 12 and 13, I believe. But it still was not a good situation. And she was still off doing her thing. I think substances were still in the picture for her. Her boyfriends were evidently abusive to at least Benjamin, if not both boys. Ben talked about that to police later, that one of the boyfriends of his mom sold him into some kind of sexual relationship with some guy that he knew. So it was just one bad circumstance after another. Ben learned at some point in his teenage years that he could make money trading sexual behavior or sexual favors. And so he started hustling on the street himself, started working prostitution. And that's really where things escalated for him. He got into different kinds of drugs. He was smoking marijuana, and he was probably doing heroin too, but and then always abusing alcohol as well. And so lots of substances involved in those years to bring him to that point where he was homeless and living on the street and scoring money by working prostitution, buying drugs, encountering females, luring them with drugs into abandoned buildings, killing them, and then repeating the cycle over and over again. So just a very ugly situation for him through those years.
Oh, my God, what a nightmare. Kid never had a break, man. And then you think, when the state comes in, finally the state gets their hands on him. Okay, we're now going to rescue this kid. And then they put in another nightmare situation, another house of horrors, another life of horrors. Mm-hmm. What are we doing? What a mess.
It really has begged the question of how can society go wrong so many times through this kid's childhood, really? Any one of the foster homes he was placed in, I guess, could have been a better situation, but we don't know too many details around those situations. Maybe there was a home in there that was good. The two boys were acting up as well. They were skipping school. They were breaking into buildings. So there was that aspect that he could have had a good situation in one of those homes, a nurturing home, but he was acting out. And so that's why it was like, okay, one home would get tired of him and ask him to be placed somewhere else. He and his brother would be bounced around. So, yeah.
Yeah, remember that case? There were like 13 kids in that family, and they had that same little bowl cut haircuts, and the parents went to Vegas to renew their vows, and they were in a house of horrors, this house of horrors. And they rescued these 13 kids from a house of horrors, and at least 3 of them went to another foster care house that was a house of horrors. Like from one house.
There's the cliche of that. How can all these foster homes be bad? I don't know. I haven't heard about that particular case, but yes, there is the cliche of the foster home being so bad. Why do people, I guess it's for the money that they agree to be a foster home, and then they turn out to be like creating a terrible environment for these kids. I don't know.
Some of them, they get these kids for slave labor, that's common. And then you got to figure, too, that the caseworkers, they get jaded after the first couple of years. And, well, this is happening everywhere we send them. What are you going to do? I'm one guy. Oh, God. One nightmare after another. What set him off, though, to start doing the killings, though? Like, that's, he wasn't killing his whole life. One day he started killing people. Or was he violent his whole life?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are different possibilities for a trigger, and I really have wrestled with that question myself. It was said in the news, it was reported in the news at the time of his arrest, somebody said, well, he lost his job at the pizza place. He did have legitimate jobs a couple times. He worked at a couple different pizza places, evidently. He handed out flyers for money. He did different legitimate things to get money. And so one of the theories that was presented is that he had lost his job at this pizza place, and that set him off. Well, the timing is wrong for that because when he lost his job, it was at a different time. It was not in that fall 1991 time frame when he started killing. And then he claimed that he had been booted out of his brother's house. See, his brother had his own struggles with drugs, and so his brother was living in a house on Elmhurst in Highland Park with his girlfriend, and sometimes Ben would come over and, like I said, sleep on the couch, stay with him for a while, and then he would just disappear, and they didn't know where he went or whatever. But at one point, his brother had to tell him to leave because his brother did not want to be drawn back into that drug culture himself, and he knew that Benjamin was doing all the drugs, and so I think even Ben claimed to police, well, my brother booted me out. Again, the time frame was off because that was December, and it's not even clear. I think it might have been the December before, not December 1991. Now, that could have been a trigger for attacking Margie in December 1990. Who knows? And that may seem to indicate that there were others along the way before we get to Darlene in October 1991. But I don't necessarily believe the theory of, okay, I got booted out of my brother's house and I went out killing people. There also is a charge on his brother's record. His brother has been okay through the years. He really has not. He hasn't been out killing people as far as we know. He does not really have a record except for there's one assault charge on his record, and that assault happened in October 1991. So I have to wonder if there was something there because Ben claimed to police that he had off and on had girlfriends and he had had boyfriends. He was bisexual. Apparently, he was also very conflicted about his sexuality. But he said that sometimes when he would have these girlfriends, they would get violent and they would try to harm him. They would kill him or try to kill him. And so there was one incident with one of the girlfriends, he said, where she shot him, I think. And so his brother went and assaulted her, beat her up. And I don't know if that's the assault charge from October 1991 because the victim seems to have a male name in that case. So I don't know. I'm just kind of out on a limb conjecturing with all of this, presenting it as possible having something there as far as trigger. We don't know much about that because then the charges were dropped and it never went anywhere or so, but it's just something that shows up in court records for his brother. So different things, and then you have the HIV thing. Is it possible he learned he had HIV? I mean, that's been posed as a theory. The newspaper in Canada that actually used the term Crack City Strangler for him before he was identified, when there was a killer out there that nobody knew who it was. There was a killer that police were pursuing. We don't know. He's a nameless, faceless person. We just know he's killing people. this newspaper in Canada, in Toronto, nicknamed him the Crack City Strangler, and speculated, because AIDS and HIV was so much in the news at the time, this paper speculated, well, maybe it's somebody with HIV who learned he got HIV from someone he was with and went on a rampage and started killing people. Well, that's an interesting theory, because it turns out this killer actually did have HIV, although no one knew it at the time. So all different kinds of ideas, but the trigger for his killing is largely unknown.
Wait a second. I was going to ask you another question, but now you call me. They gave him a nickname, the Crack City Strangler. This is before they arrested him? How'd they know this crack was involved? I guess crack pipes near the murder scenes?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This newspaper, I want to say it was the Star. I think it was the Star. And it did this splashy, I have a copy of this splashy center spread color story on the case. It was a tabloid newspaper format, not broadsheet, if you know what I'm saying. And it was like a weekly paper. It was not a daily paper, as I recall. But I do have a copy in my files for this case. But yeah, big splashy story. And they went in all directions. And this was the summer of 1992, like June-ish 1992, before Atkins was arrested in August. So no one knew who this guy was. But they called him the Crack City Strangler, I guess because Detroit and Highland Park, much of this case took place in Highland Park. There were 3 women murdered in Detroit, and the other 8 were murdered in Highland Park. And maybe that was just, they're over there in Canada, and they're looking at us here in Michigan, and maybe that was just part of their perspective from over there in Canada, calling Detroit or Highland Park Crack City. I don't know. But crack was fairly prevalent, so yeah, you do have to wonder, okay.
And just think, the Canadians' impression of us has only gotten worse in recent weeks.
Yeah.
I can imagine what they're saying now.
Yeah.
I hate to laugh, man. It's these poor victims, the families of these victims, man. But yeah, what are you gonna do, man? It's just we live in a nightmare as it is. But the question I had written down though, before we got into that whole Crack City Canadian thing, is the brother. Was this an older brother or a younger brother?
He was 1 year older, born in 1967. Yep.
Now that's fascinating, right? Because one brother, they both experienced the same thing, right? They were both in that back seat when their mom's in the front seat, and one goes in one direction. Partially a couple of dips, little twists and turns along the way. But, did you get a chance to talk to the brother?
I did not. I tried to contact him. I think I found him on the place, in the same place where I find most people when I'm researching these cases, and that is Facebook. You can find everybody on Facebook. But he did not respond. I totally get it. I totally don't blame him for that, but I would love to have talked to him. But he seems to be okay. He's in Michigan. He was in Detroit area still for a while. I think he also has lived north of Detroit, more toward the Flint area too, if I have the correct multiple Facebook profiles for him.
Yeah, with Facebook, especially with someone involved with a negative kind of publicity, they get a lot of messages. They get a lot of instant messages, and a lot of them are probably filtered out, and then they don't want to deal with people on Facebook. It's better to find their phone number or something like that. Okay, so Mr. Benjamin Atkins, he's out there whacking people practically daily for a year. How does he get on the police radar?
He actually got on police radar a couple times before he was arrested. It's interesting. Both Highland Park and Detroit detained him or questioned him for being in an abandoned building where he shouldn't be months before he was actually identified as the killer. So that's crazy. In October, was it October? It was fall 1991 when Highland Park discovered that Atkins and this friend of his were breaking into a building and vandalizing. in this empty building, and it turned out it was the Monterey Motel, where 3 of his victims would be discovered a few months later. But police in Highland Park questioned him and then released him. They did have a charge on him. I think it was loitering or vandalism, but Ben never showed up for his court appearance, and just so there was a warrant out for his arrest, and really that was all that happened there. And then January rolls around, January 1992, and by this time a couple people, actually 1, 2, 3 people, all 3 victims in Detroit had been discovered at this point. So Detroit was realizing, okay, there's got to be a serial killer. The MO, the victimology is all the same for all 3 of these victims. Plus, we hear that Highland Park has found somebody over there. So the word is starting to get around in law enforcement that there's probably a serial killer out there in January 1992. And so Detroit, after discovering their 3rd victim, they decided to do a sweep of abandoned buildings along that Woodward Avenue corridor. Mm-hmm. And in one of their sweeps, in an abandoned building, they found this guy sleeping on a couch. And, of course, he wasn't supposed to be there, so they rounded him out, took him downtown, and started questioning him. Now, this is crazy because they asked him, okay, what have you heard on the street? Have you heard about these women who have been killed? Have you heard anything going around? Have you seen anybody strange? There was evidently nothing about this guy that set them off. They really weren't that suspicious of him. They just questioned him per their normal protocol. And so this was Benjamin Atkins, and he was talking about, I've been hearing some of the women, and they're a little bit scared. They've been seeing these news reports, and they're a little bit scared that there's been girls that have come up missing. In fact, my friend Kim, she's working the streets, and she told me, hey, if you ever see me out there, keep an eye on me, okay? Make sure I'm safe.
And she was one of the victims?
Police said evidently this gal said that to him. I mean, it was just crazy. Wow. And so police questioned him, and they let him go, having no idea that this was their killer. So twice he was in police custody and didn't really raise an eyebrow. But to be fair, one of the Highland Park police who worked this case, Larry Beller, he told me there was nothing about Atkins that would scare you. And even his defense attorney, Jeffrey Edison, said the same thing. He seemed to be just fine in person. There was nothing menacing about him. Larry Beller called him Gentle Ben because there was just nothing scary about him. So that was the vibe that he gave off. Very interesting.
A couple of questions. And now they got all these YouTube videos of interrogations. Is there one available of his interrogation with the police?
I don't know of any video of his interrogations out there now. If it is, it's probably somebody just going from news reports at the time. Gotcha.
That would be great if you can get a hold of that. Now, what about...
It was not recorded, yeah.
Oh,
it was,
okay.
And that was a point of contention in court is that when he was questioned after his arrest in August 1992, it was just sitting down at a table with him with pen and paper. There was nothing recorded. So that I can tell you that is an absolute fact that everyone I spoke to in the case said.
Any possibility that he had an accomplice? Because if he was vandalizing with a buddy, any possibilities he had an accomplice in these murders and these abductions and stuff?
I don't think so. He did have a buddy when he did the B&E in fall 1991 in Highland Park at the Monterey, and his brother in the younger years, when they were both teenagers, he did a B&E with his brother at Christmas time, I think in the 1980s. But no, I think he was alone in every one of these cases. Definitely with the 2 survivors, he was alone when he approached them, and it seems like everything he said to police, he was alone.
Now, back to the buddy, though, for the vandalism. Did you look up his police record? Did he have any kind of strange things going on with him?
Yeah, I did, and there was really nothing of note there. So he definitely, as far as I know, did not go on to become a killer or anything like that.
Not yet.
I think he was just Yeah. I mean, he may even still be around. But I wasn't able to find him. You know, any name I come across when I'm doing the research, because the proportion of people that you can find these days based on who all was actually involved in the case is pretty small. And so any name I get, I try to look it up and I try to find that person no matter what their connection was to the case. And so I was not able to find this guy. But I think he was just a street guy that Ben knew, that just a buddy, you know, not much else to it.
Okay, so probably no accomplice. Now, then what was it? Because they pick him up on this day. He has a warrant. He's trespassing, sleeping on a couch. They pick him up there. They question him. But what was it that they says, hey, this is our guy, and then he winds up getting arrested for these serial killings?
It was Darlene. When Darlene was attacked in the fall, 1991, she knew him. She had seen him around. That's why she was very disarmed about this guy. She knew him by the name Tony, and you see the name Tony associated with Atkins a lot. It was the street name that he went by. He didn't go by Benjamin on the street. Wow. So she knew Tony, had seen him around. They went to some of the same crack houses, and so it was just, you know, just like with Margie. It's like, hey, I got something to smoke. Let's go smoke somewhere. So they find a place to go and they start smoking, and things just go wrong. And he tried to kill Darlene, and she was able to get away, or he would have killed her. He definitely would have killed her. It was much more violent than Margie's encounter. So she got away, and she did not report this to police for a while, and there's a whole range of reasons for that. When you are working prostitution, when you're a sex worker, and something like this happens, there's multiple reasons you don't report it to police. But finally, in February, after they made the discovery at the Monterey Motel, mid-February, they discovered 3 of Atkins' victims on the same day, and this just blew things wide open, and it became very public, very talked about. Yes, there is a serial killer. There's no doubt about it now. Very splashy across the news. Well, Darlene heard this, saw it on the news. She knew one of the victims, Valerie Chalk. Their kids went to school together, and so she felt it was Tony. She really just felt, okay, I think this is Tony, the guy who attacked me, the guy that I have known for a few years out here on the street. So she went in March 1992 to report it to police. Police took her statement, and then it went nowhere. They did not explore the lead. They didn't look into this Tony guy. It was months later when someone in her family, her husband's brother, put the heat on police and said, you know, you had a police report back in March that you ignored, and this is a valid lead. You need to look into this. And also with the help of another person that Darlene knew named Donna, together, they finally got her some attention. And then in summer 1992, she came back to the police department. She gave the statement again, gave as much detail as she could remember. And then she was assigned to a Michigan State trooper who had been drawn into the case, who was helping as part of this task force that was interagency at that point, pulling from several different agencies in the Detroit area as far as law enforcement. And so this trooper took Darlene, and they went around the Woodward Avenue corridor together on foot and in a car. They went looking for Tony. And so finally, one night in August, they found him, and that's when he was apprehended and questioned, and then confessed to killing these 11 women and attacking Darlene.
Now, Darlene supposedly just walks into the police station voluntarily twice to give this statement, or was she some type of regular police informant who was constantly giving them information, working for them?
She avoided the police like the plague.
But in this instance, she went in there twice as a good citizen.
Yep. She really felt, and I think, again, it's like, okay, she knew Valerie. Okay. And she knew that these girls were getting killed. And so it took a lot. I really, from talking to her son, Rashad, I think it took a lot for her to actually go to police in March. It really took a lot. The police are not the friends of these girls on the street. They're really not.
Or these homeless guys either. And well, it's a really big mess, too, that the cops use these people as informants, and so it's kind of to their advantage. It's in their interest to keep them homeless and on the street and doing petty crimes and a drug addict on the street and doing street prostitution because they're the ears, the informants on the street. So it was just a vicious cycle. The way we do everything is just so stupid and messed up. But let me ask you.
Yeah. I was just going to add in real quick, just to reiterate, really what you're saying is the police have always gotten really good intel from the people on the street, particularly sex workers. They always have been a source of good intel. But anyways, continue on with your thought.
And not even the street. When you get into escort service and madams and stuff, they're all informants. It's all that's they're all doing it. Heidi Fleiss, all that stuff. But now you mentioned earlier that they found 3 bodies in this vacant hotel where previously they caught this guy sleeping. And it's the same hotel to where he did the vandalism?
Yes. Isn't that crazy? He had been caught sleeping, or he had been caught breaking in with his buddy at the Monterey. And, that was in the fall. But then this other incident, see, this is 2 different jurisdictions. One is in Highland Park. Then in January in Detroit, he was found in this other building when they were doing the sweep after the discovery of the 3rd Detroit victim. He even said in that police interview, they asked him, so where else are you sleeping around town? Where else have you been? He named the Monterey. It's one of the places he was sleeping. So, it's crazy.
And how long were these bodies there? They must have been decomposing. There had to be odors. Other people hadn't been sleeping there, right?
All 3 of the women at the Monterey had been decomposed to the point that police could not get their fingerprints. They had to do a special process through the state police post, through their crime lab to actually essentially peel off their skin and get their fingerprints. So they were decomposed quite a bit. Valerie had been left there several weeks. She may have been killed in the fall herself. It's just so hard to say when each of these women were killed. And when they investigated the crime scenes, they really could not pinpoint time of death. Some of them may have been there just a couple weeks and some a couple months. So it was very hard to determine that.
Even a couple of weeks is a long time. There had to be other people passing through those abandoned buildings. Where else are they sleeping? There's not that many places to go, for these people.
Well, he made an effort to hide the bodies. Yes, these places where he left these women, not just the motel, but abandoned houses and commercial buildings where he left the other victims, they were heavy traffic areas, believe it or not. For being empty buildings, they were used all the time by drug addicts and sex workers. But to counter that, he did make an effort to hide these women. He would hide them in closets. In the Monterey, each one of them, he put her in a shower stall of a room. They were all 3 in separate rooms in the shower stall, but with stuff piled on top of her so she wouldn't be apparent even if somebody walked into the bathroom there.
Odor still smells. Okay, so cops pick him up finally. I guess he didn't walk in and turn himself in, but they finally pick him up, right? And then they interrogate him. He confesses?
Yes, he did. He even told police, I'm talking about walking in, he actually did almost one time. He said to police when he was arrested in August that there was one point leading up to that where he actually went to a police station and was going to turn himself in, but then he left without doing it. So he wavered a little bit, and it did take a little bit to crack him. There was a very talented interrogator named Ron Sanders who has since passed. He just passed about a year ago. I did get to speak to him for the book, though, and he was called in to interrogate Atkins. And the first cop that he was talking to was the head of homicide at the time for Detroit police and was getting nowhere. They were just doing small talk like, hey, what do you think of the such and such the other day or whatever? They were just having relaxed conversation. And so because they were getting nowhere, they called Ron in, who was on his way to do a vacation in Chicago with his family. They called him in, and then he got right into the room and went cracking against this guy. Where'd you get those scars? Well, I got them from my boyfriend. No, you didn't. You got those from the women as they were fighting you off. Just was very, very aggressive with him, and finally got Atkins to confess in a pretty short time.
Okay, then. But I guess when you got a lawyer, though, they probably, he probably pled not guilty anyway. Did they go to trial or did he plea deal?
Yeah, he when he was questioned, he did not want a lawyer. He waived his right to a lawyer, and then he was assigned Jeffrey Edison to defend him. There was a judge in the Detroit Recorder's Court that appointed Jeffrey Edison to defend Atkins. And so with all that, Edison worked very hard on this case. He was a young lawyer at the time. He actually still practices. I talked to him a couple times at his office. Very wonderful gentleman, very skilled, and has done other high-profile cases.
Yes, the name sounds familiar. Yeah, what other cases did he work on?
I believe, although I didn't talk to him about this, but I hear his name connected with Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit, who I'm sure everybody's heard of.
No, I haven't. Who is Kwame Kilpatrick? Remind me.
He is a former mayor who was incarcerated and was given a pardon by Trump during his first administration.
Gotcha.
At the tail end of that. But Kwame was incarcerated, convicted of, I don't even know, I wasn't living in Michigan at the time. I was off in some other part of the country, so I didn't follow it very closely. But basically white-collar crimes while he was in the office of mayor, and then incarcerated for a few years, and now has been free, and I think back in Michigan. But anyways,
I'm sure he's a very fine
Jeffrey
person.
Edison, well, I have no idea. I've never met him. When I was living in Detroit, Dennis Archer was my mayor, and I loved Dennis Archer. I cannot say enough nice things about Dennis Archer. Now, there was a great mayor. I will just say that, and, take it for what you will. But anyways, Jeffrey Edison, I think that was another case that he did. But he is remembered very well by the cops who worked the Atkins case as just giving this case his all and doing a very good job representing Atkins, because he was up against not only those confessions. Atkins was sitting there freely confessing, non-coerced, about all of these women that he encountered, but also there was physical evidence against him. And this is a misperception that's out there about this case. Some people claim that there was no physical evidence against him. Actually, there was DNA evidence. The Valerie Chalk scene, they found a tissue with a semen sample on it, and it was Atkins' DNA. So he did have physical evidence against him in this case. He also had a palm print on the shower stall where he left another one of the Monterey victims. That was Juanita Hardy. He left a palm print on the shower stall, probably as he was placing her there in the shower. So physical evidence against him, confessions, stacked up against him, and a survivor, Darlene, eyewitness account testifying against him. So that was quite a lot for Jeffrey Edison to take on, but he still gave it his all.
And they did go to trial.
Yes, they did go to trial in January 1994. The trial lasted until April. It was an unusual trial because it was two juries, because they had two jurisdictions here. They had Highland Park in Detroit. The Highland Park cases were considered part of Wayne County. The Detroit cases were under the jurisdiction of what was Detroit Recorder's Court at the time. It no longer exists. It was disbanded, I think, later in the 1990s. But two different juries hearing the case at the same time, Detroit jury hearing for the 3 women there, and Highland Park or Wayne County hearing for the 8 women in Highland Park, and rendering separate verdicts, which were both guilty, but trying everything all at once in one trial from January to April. So that was a bit unusual.
And what did he wind up sentence?
He was sentenced to mandatory life sentences for, I think, basically everything except one of the cases with Darlene, the survivor. I think he was convicted. He had multiple charges for Darlene, maybe rape and attempted murder, whatever. He was convicted for one of those. The other one he was not convicted for, but he was convicted for all 11 murders.
Okay, we're talking to B.R. Bates, Billy Bates. You can find her at brbates.com. Her Instagram is B.R. Bates, and she's got a blog on blogspot.com called From the Keyboard of B.R. Bates. If you want to meet her in person, it's at the Reynolds Library in Howard City, Michigan. You get a book signing there. It's September 24th at 6 p.m. at the Reynolds Library, Howard City, Michigan. And the book we're talking about today is The Crack City Strangler, The Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins, Murders in the Motor City Series 2. And we had her on previously. Check it out. The previous book we did about the doll. What was it? The doll guy. The baby doll serial killer, John Eric Armstrong Homicides. Great story. That was a good interview, too. Now, you can hear the way she tells this story. You know she's a good storyteller. And the book has like 4 stars, but there's a couple of complaints, Ms. B.R. Bates. Okay? That you, Ms. B.R. Bates, used an incorrect photo of Mr. Benjamin Atkins on the cover of your book. What do you have to say about that?
Yep. How dare I use a photo on the cover that's not actually Benjamin Atkins?
Okay.
No, this is incorrect. I will tell you that. For years and years, there was a photo posted on the Wikipedia page for Benjamin Atkins that was not actually Benjamin Atkins. It was a prison photo of a different Ben Atkins in Florida, not a convicted serial killer. But because this photo was on the Wikipedia page, it was circulated everywhere. It was used in prior podcasts for the case. It was used in an ebook about the Benjamin Atkins. It was used in websites talking about Benjamin Atkins. So the whole world thinks that's what Benjamin Atkins looked like. It was not. But even the defense attorney, Jeffrey Edison,
it's
when
still
he
up
saw
there.
this photo,
That picture's still up there. Right? That's the wrong picture?
No, actually, on his Wikipedia page right now, it's a free press picture that is Ben Atkins. That
really?
is
He looks
actually
great in that picture. He looks nice and healthy.
Yeah, he's cleaned up because he's in court and he's been dry. He's off the drugs at that point. So that picture on the Wikipedia page right now from the free press is actually Ben Atkins truly in court in 1994. And yes, all cleaned up, as you said. But this other one is a prison photo, and it's an inmate. It's a black male, and everybody thinks that that's what Atkins looks like. And so when they see the cover of this book, they think, that's not the guy I've seen the picture of for so many years. Now, the picture that's on the cover of the Crack City Strangler is a Polaroid that police took in Detroit in January 1992 when they questioned him. And then one of those times, that January 1992, after he was found in an abandoned building. That is a Polaroid photo that they took. That is honestly 100% Benjamin Atkins, the real Benjamin Atkins. And if you look, there's some similarities between that photo and the one that's on the Wikipedia page now where he's cleaned up in court. Although the photo on the book, which I did have permission to use because it was obtained by FOIA from Detroit police and labeled as Ben Atkins, you can tell he's been on the street a while. He looks pretty rough in that photo on the book's cover. And so people, because they've used to this other photo, that they've gone into Amazon and claimed that I used the wrong photo on the book. So please do not believe that. It is actually a photo of Atkins on the book.
Yeah, and of course, all these true crime fans are the ultimate experts on every case.
Exactly.
God forbid B.R. Bates
you.
would know what she's doing when they've been sitting home Googling all day long. They know this case. But if you go to even on serial killers, the subreddit serial killers, they say Wikipedia's been using the wrong photo for serial killer Benjamin for 10 years. The wrong photo.
Exactly.
Ben Atkins, not Benjamin Bates. Ben Atkins. Ben Atkins. B.R. Bates is not a serial killer. We can confirm that. Ben Atkins, who was an inmate in Florida for illegally selling cocaine, not even the same crime. So,
right.
Okay, so we've established now that this is you're using the correct photo. And
yes, please. I mean, those of us who remember what life was like before the internet can tell anybody else out there, you can't believe everything you see online.
Imagine some of these kids, these internet babies, if they had to take a trip to the library, like we did when we were, I don't know about you, but like when I was in high school and stuff like that.
Yep, I went to the library lots of times.
Right. And even that wasn't computerized either. You had the Dewey Decimal System you had to figure out and work that thing going on there.
Yep, you had the little cards. You looked it up in a big drawer with little cards in it.
Yep, whole nother world, man. But you know what? The thing too, that did build up your research skills. And I remember my first job in a PI office was going through the crisscross directories, and the phone numbers were in order, and I would give you the name, the address for the person in the phone. And that kind of work, it's good for you. You learn, that's how you learn this kind of stuff. And these kids think they're experts. Is there anything else about the Benjamin Atkins, not Benjamin Bates, Benjamin Atkins and the Crack City Strangler that I haven't asked you want the audience to know about?
Well, one of what I think is an interesting aspect of the case is that he did claim after he was arrested that he was hearing voices, and so we explore that in the book quite a bit. But anybody who's interested in that psychological aspect will get some meat to take on in the book in that way.
It is heartbreaking. You see this picture on his Wikipedia page. He looks so healthy, man. You know what I mean? They could have snatched this guy up off the street or when he was a teenager, and could have avoided 13 lives. Could have been spared the trauma or the murder, and clean this guy up early on and helped him out instead of putting him in another house of horrors.
Yeah.
Just what are we doing? Remind us about we had John originally about the baby doll killer. Remind us about that story, that one too.
That was John Eric Armstrong. He did operate in Detroit, also killing sex workers. It was a few years later. He was killing people in 1999 and 2000, and then he was arrested in April 2000. He hunted in a slightly different area of the inner city of Detroit. He was on Michigan Avenue as opposed to Woodward Avenue, and had a variety of victims, whereas Atkins looked for one particular type of female on the street. Armstrong didn't really care. He grabbed whoever was convenient as far as the sex trade there. So, yes, another convicted serial killer who is still alive and who I've spoken to and is serving time in Jackson, Michigan right now.
Any chance of him getting out?
I would certainly not think so. He does have multiple life sentences.
Okay.
So I don't think that there's any chance, no.
And how many people did he want? They called him Opie. In the Navy, they called him Opie.
Yes, he did. Yeah, they did in the military when he was in the Navy because of his very humble, very innocent-seeming demeanor and his red hair. But he was known to have killed 5 people in Detroit. But the thing about Armstrong was when he was arrested, he confessed to other murders while he was serving in the Navy in the 1990s aboard the USS Nimitz.
Yeah, I remember that now. And they called him Baby Doll because he had that on, was it a pink Jeep he drove, something like that, wasn't it?
It was a dark Jeep that had a baby doll plate on the front, and it was a nickname that he and his wife shared.
Now, all these serial killers in Detroit, in this pretty much the same area, not the same street, and they're not competing so directly. But is this really common? Is that many serial killers up in Detroit? What's going on up there?
I don't think so. I've heard other people say that. Other people who have interviewed me seem to have that perception, but I've never really thought of it that way. I don't think Detroit has any more serial killers than any other place. I think every big city has a big sex trade, and there's always serial killers who are preying on sex workers, and then there's just serial killers who prey on anybody. I really don't feel like Detroit has more than its fair share, and I think that it has been waning in recent years, of course, with our technology, the law enforcement technology, the fact that every move we make is on video or documented somehow on social media. So the age of the serial killer, I believe, has passed anyways, regardless of whether or not Detroit has had more of them over the years.
And B.R. Bates, what are you working on next?
Well, I'm not even sure. I normally write in the pop culture genre, and I've always got a couple projects going on over there. But as far as true crime, I would love to do another book in this series with Wild Blue Press, this Murders in the Motor City series. We'll just see how things go. There is another case, an unsolved case in Detroit I would like to take on, but I'm not absolutely sure I'm going to do that yet.
And your blog spot here from the keyboard of B.R. Bates, what kind of stuff do you write about there?
I do a little bit of behind the scenes of these two books. There's some photos that we didn't have room for in the book, so I feature them there. There's also a photo gallery on the Wild Blue Press website for the Baby Doll Serial Killer book, so you can see other photos that weren't in the book. But I expand on it. Like, I'm doing a series right now that I call Remember Them, the hashtag Remember Them, and I'm highlighting every victim, every woman in both of these cases one at a time. And I'm talking more about her. I'm talking more about the hunt to find a family member or someone who knew her to interview for the book. I'm doing, like I said, a little bit more behind the scenes, elaborating on the concepts that you see in the books.
Yeah, so often these poor victims, especially if they're street workers and stuff like that, people just dismiss them as just insignificant and inconsequential.
Yes.
I know.
Exactly. I also shot a series of videos for my YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel, too, that's under B.R. Bates, but I shot a series of shorts, and each short talks about one of the victims that I'm going to start uploading those in the next few weeks. That because to me, it's just so important. I really feel like we need to keep refocusing on the women because they're not just names in a news report. They were real, living human beings, and so I'm aiming to do that with this hashtag Remember Them series.
Yeah, every life is precious. Everyone deserves respect. brbates.com. Instagram is brbates again. And what do you call it? From the keyboard of BR Bates. And you want to meet her in person at the library over here, Reynolds Library, Howard City, Michigan, September 24th at 6 p.m. You can check out. And what are you going to be doing there? Just book signings or just
talking about the
lecture?
cases. My collaborator on the first book, Dr. Gerald Cliff, is going to join me. We'll talk about both the Armstrong and the Atkins case.
And he collaborated on both books?
No, he just collaborated on the first case with me because he worked that case. He did not work the Atkins case,
Gotcha.
But he did work the Armstrong case.
Billy Bates, B.R. Bates, thank you so much, man. Always bring us good content. Keep us informed of your next book, man. Let me know right away. Don't wait for Wild Horse to get a hold of me. Get a hold of me yourself. Wait for them. We'll wait forever, right? Or anything you want to promote. Anything you're ever doing, just give me a call. We'll put you right back in here.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. As much as you can, what are you going to do? You're a good storyteller, that's for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Good night.
All right. Bye-bye.